Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Barber, and I'm the branch manager of the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the branch office is located is traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Bay people. On behalf of the Ottawa branch, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar from Compassionate Ottawa called Advanced Care Planning. And we warmly welcome our presenters, Marc Seguin and Leslie McDermott. Marc began his career launching and commercializing innovations in telecom and entrepreneurial startups. Then he turned his attention to the challenges of financial and personal care management for seniors. He's helped many families, including his own, plan for and deal with the inevitable changes in life that come with aging. Based on his experiences, Marc has developed an approach to maintaining continuity in financial affairs and personal care, which he's outlined in everyday language in his book, Advocacy in Aging. Leslie McDermott spent her career in education, health, and social services. She's a retiree like us. Her last position was as executive director of the Southeast Ottawa Community Health Centre. Leslie is a recipient of the Governor General's Caring Canadian Award and the Ottawa Women of Distinction Award. Her volunteer activities include facilitating Compassionate Ottawa conversations like this one and helping out at a horse rescue farm. They are joined today by Jenna Devaraja, program coordinator at Compassionate Ottawa. Jenna is our key contact and secret weapon, really, with Compassionate Ottawa, and she's been the one responsible for setting up the many webinars that we've been so proud to host with Compassionate Ottawa. Veuillez noter que le webinaire sera présenté en anglais, mais la participation bilingue est toujours encouragée. Now, I want to give a special welcome to anybody here who is not yet a member of the association. We hope that these webinars will inspire you to join us. And to the folks who are already members, we hope that these webinars, of course, will encourage you to maintain your membership. And please remember, you can always invite non-members to attend our webinars as guests. Now, there's going to be a question and answer period at the end of the webinar, so all you need to do is to type your questions into the chat box during the session, and at the end of the presentation, Jenna will be helping the presenters. She'll be reading them out loud and they'll be answering. Now, we're recording today's webinar, but it's just the plenary session when we're all together. And after it's over, we're going to send you from the Ottawa branch, likely from Antoine Ballageron. We'll be sending you an email with instructions on how to access the recording, how to access the presentation resources, and also how to give the gift of membership or join our association. So thank you all so much for showing up this morning. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Jenna with Compassionate Ottawa. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Linda. So hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Devaraja, and I am the program coordinator at Compassionate Ottawa. I thought that before we start that I'd go very quickly over some of the Zoom functions, and Linda did mention a few. So as you may notice, that we are going to keep everyone muted right now while the facilitators are presenting, but this will be an interactive workshop, so there will be opportunity for you to share your comments and questions, as Linda mentioned, and I'm going to highlight a few ways you can do that. So one of the ways that you'll be able to do that, as Linda mentioned, was through the chat function. So if you have ongoing questions, please do send them through the chat function. If you are in your computer, you can use this by clicking on the speech bubble. And typically on a computer, the right-hand side, a window will appear and you can type in your message to us. Now, if you are on a mobile device, just make sure you click on the More button, the 3 dots, and then a drop-down menu will appear and you click on the chat function. Like I mentioned, there is also going to be an opportunity for you to verbally share your comments and questions as well. And so there are a few ways you can do that using the raise hand functions, just so we'll call upon you one at a time. Now, with the older versions of Zoom, you'll need to click on the participant icon. And once you do, a window will appear and then a raise hand button will be at the bottom. Now, with newer Zoom, you'll just need to click on the raise hand icon like that. And once you do, we'll be notified and we'll call upon you to speak. And again, if you are on a mobile device, you'll just need to click on the 3 buttons and then a drop-down menu will appear. Now, something I did want to mention was that we will be also bringing everyone into breakout rooms. So when the time comes, we'll give you instructions on how to instructions on what to do in the breakout session. And I should note that all of you should have the Go Wish statements that were sent to you yesterday. So I would just very quickly recommend for those of you who don't have it to quickly search your emails. I will be also sending it through the chat function right now. So you'll see it appear in a few minutes, and you can just click it and just have that handy for the breakout room. Now, we encourage that when you go into the breakout rooms that you turn on your microphone and your camera so that you can have and engage with your fellow participants. And of course, if you are not comfortable in the breakout rooms, once you enter, you can leave. So just click on the leave breakout button. So at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll be brought into the main group, and you'll have to wait until the workshop, the exercise is over and the facilitators return. So I think that's all for me for now. I'm going to turn it to our fantastic facilitators, Marc and Leslie, to start our presentation.
Great, thanks, Jenna. I'm going to start by just going over our agenda for the next 90 minutes or so. So we're going to begin by talking a little bit about Compassionate Ottawa. Then we'll unpack what advanced care planning is all about. As Jenna mentioned, we are going to have some time to break into small groups and have some conversations about our values, our wishes, our beliefs, and how they can relate to end-of-life care. We're going to return from those groups, hopefully have some time to get some feedback on what that was like and anything that came up. And then we'll continue on and have some additional conversations around substitute decision makers, power of attorney for personal care. And then we'll hopefully have time at the end, some questions that you may have or comments, do a bit of a summary, and Jenna will provide an overview of resources that we'll be sending you after the workshop today. Like our host, before we begin, on behalf of Compassionate Ottawa, I'd like to acknowledge that we're located on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We work here and pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. So what is Compassionate Ottawa? Compassionate Ottawa is a citizen-led, primarily volunteer movement. We use evidence-based approaches and work in collaboration with others. Our aim is to support people in living well as they approach the end of life, and also in dying, death, loss, and bereavement. And we believe the way to do this is to strengthen the capacity of people to care for each other in times of serious illness and loss. We believe everyone should have the opportunity to enjoy wellness and self-respect until the end of life. We work today, you'll have this experience, but we work to provide information and conversations so that each of us can be more informed and more comfortable about end of life, dying, and death, and be able to look after ourselves, our families, our friends, and our communities. I think most of us would agree that there, at least in our culture, there's a fair bit of discomfort around death, and it can be very isolating for people who are approaching the end of life or dying. And it can be very uncomfortable and difficult for those of us that are caregivers and supporting folks who are at the end of life. So Compassionate Ottawa, I don't know, how much you know about compassionate city charters, but we subscribe to something called a compassionate city charter. And it is a collective. It outlines the roles of kind of civic government, public institutions, and other organizations in creating compassionate communities. And, in short, compassionate communities are really about inclusion, diversity, equity, and voice. So, in summary for us, sort of following that desire to create these compassionate communities around caring and collectiveness around end of life and death and dying, we're really trying to change attitudes and behaviors, sort of change the way we think about death and dying so that we can be better prepared and improve our quality of life. And to encourage people to really think about what's important to them as they approach the end of life, and then to communicate that to others. We've been even more so, I would say, in the last year or so, engaging with Ottawa's many diverse communities to provide some support as they develop their own conversations about ACP that are both appropriate and relevant. And we keep expanding. Today is an example, but we really work in collaboration with other organizations that have common interests in increasing kind of our comfort with death and dying and our preparation so that end of life can be as close to we imagine it to be as possible. So I think I'll leave it there and turn it over to Marc.
Thank you, Leslie. And let's go back. Let's go into some of the basics here of why is this important? Why are we doing this? There's lots of very interesting statistics on this slide. Let's focus on the first one that says that 80% of Canadians have given end-of-life care some thought. And I was quite impressed when I saw that statistic. I was wondering, why is it that so many have thought about it? And I'm not sure I have the right answer, but certainly in Canada, we're very fortunate to have a good healthcare system and good medical care. And what's that doing is actually prolonging our life. And that's a good thing. However, it comes with that the reality that there's a higher likelihood that we'll have degraded capabilities or chronic illness at one point or another that will require some caregiving at one point. It also lowers the probability of what ultimately I think a lot of people wish is a sudden death, which would prohibit the need for end-of-life care. But in the end, all of this translates into, I think there's a growing sensitivity that end-of-life care is becoming more and more of a reality. In fact, I've read a book, I've read multiple books, but as we live longer, there's multiple life transitions that will occur with different degradation. Now, not everyone follows the same pattern, but that's kind of what is going on. Now, with this reflection that people have put in, I still think that these reflections are typically not deep enough and more concerning. They don't translate themselves in either communication of people's wishes or documentation of such wishes in the form of an advanced care plan. So that's a lot of why we are continuing to have these seminars and these discussion around advanced care planning. Let me share you a little bit of my personal story and journey into advanced care planning and a little bit of where I'm at. But I got really sensitized to this as I lived through my in-laws' state of dementia. Both my in-laws had dementia, and obviously we had to support them for many years through that process and journey. And my parents as well, we started planning their end of life. My parents are very fortunate. They're now 90 and 95, and but my mom is now going through probably middle stage dementia, slightly maybe a bit more advanced, but we've seen that coming. So a lot of that experience had me reflect on my own wishes and what I wanted to do about it. So I did go into the process of preparing an advanced care directive for myself and shared it with my family. And I'm still early days, I would say, in the communications, but it has openly been shared with families as well as my substitute decision maker. But I also shared it with my doctor. Unfortunately, through COVID, I couldn't share it live, but I sent it through email. And interestingly enough, about 6 months later after I sent it, I kind of forgotten about it. And my doctor actually, I had a consultation online, and at the end of the consultation, my doctor asked me whether she could share my template with her colleagues. And that got my attention because, first of all, she had looked at it, and she obviously liked what she had seen. And I asked her, what did you like about it? And she liked that it was comprehensive, it was clear, and it was easy to work with, and that would make her life easier to be able to respect or my wishes and work with my family. And obviously I had planned in my follow-up visits to have further discussion with her, and at appropriate time through life transition, maybe go deeper, but at least we had a foundation start. But bottom line is I now have a somewhat of a small community and advocates that are starting to understand my values and wishes. And it doesn't mean that life is going to make sure that all of that gets 100% respected, but it stands a chance to be respected. And to me, that's the most important. So in the end, what I wanted to say here is that advanced care planning is important for all Canadians, for your wishes to be honored, and the reality that we are all going to go through to various life transition as the medical and healthcare system is able to keep us alive, and that's a good part. And we're going to talk a little bit more later on about, how the importance of not only reflecting on what we want to care in the end of life, but through our life transition and today. Moving on to the next slide. Well, COVID has been certainly a special and unique period for all of us, and all of us have lived and witnessed different experience. But we've all heard of the heart-wrenching stories of what has happened in long-term care. And it's not, we've heard about all the bad parts. There's also some good parts. But what's highlighted is those realities and a bit more visibility for people that there are life transition and there are needs for various healthcare support through those life transition and ultimately in the end of life care. What stood out to me and what retained my attention is through the COVID is social isolation and the impact of that, the challenges of caregiving from a distance, as well as the psychological consequences not having live interaction, and certainly for those going through bereavement, that's been that much more difficult. I don't want to just focus on the negatives, so let me tell you a little bit of positive stories, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of my parents' story through this. Now, we had the good fortune of, through my personal experience with my in-laws, to get involved, I would say 8 to 10 years ago, probably later than I wish for or I promote, but still in time when my parents were still healthy, very active, and open to dialogue, the topics. And so we got engaged, and it was my sister and I, both as she was the substitute decision maker for healthcare through a power of attorney, and me for property. And we got involved. And good fortune is a year before COVID, we had proactively decided to move them into a retirement home. And we had thought through of a retirement home that would have an assisted living ward, as we could see and suspected my mom was in early dementia. All this to say is that through the COVID 2 years, we've had 3 difficult transitions to deal with. While difficult in any case, in COVID time more difficult, but ultimately I think we managed quite well through that because of the advanced involvement, because of the advanced dialogue around advanced care and participation. And fundamentally, I'll summarize it. The first move was after, it was in October 2020, the first year of COVID, where we had to separate my parents, which in the best of time is difficult for my mom to be moving into assisted living care. The second one was my mom actually got COVID in May 2021, at the time where, again, COVID was a little bit more severe, so it was worrisome to us. And then finally, we had to make not a final, but another transition from the assisted living ward and retirement home to a nursing home in the last month. And this is what the peak of the Omicron virus. But I'm going through these transition because through COVID, we've heard of all the horror stories, but in our case, I would say it went quite well despite the difficulty of those transition and the difficulty of operating in COVID. And I would say it's because communication had been established. We had ongoing family relationships for the greater family. The caregiving was very proactive. We had built trust and relationship, and that's critical to build the trust with, even though it's your parents, you can't take it for granted that in all circumstances those close relationship exists. And then we had made the retirement home, even though for some people it's like, or it's perceived to be institution. It's not. Moving into retirement home is a new home in a new community, and made that a positive experience. And lastly, we had built relationship through this process with the community in the retirement home, with the staff and the medical support that was in this. All of this was facilitated our difficult circumstance. So in the end, I just wanted to mention that COVID to me has just exacerbated the importance of getting engaged into an advanced care process, getting in the conversation going with caregivers and communicating one's belief and values to make what are difficult situations a lot more positive and easy to manage. Moving on to the next slide. Love this slide. I'm a big believer in living life fully and living a quality of life. And this says it all. Yes, we are going to die one day, but between now and then, we're going to live fully, and hopefully all of us are able to define what that means for us. And again, that reinforces the need to reflect and take a step back on, how you wish to live every day, what is truly important to you, what do you value, and start, applying that through your existing days. Now, the other thing I'm going to encourage is that there will be life transition. There will be that degradation, not for all of us, but for many of us. And you need to start reflecting on what this quality of life and living fully means throughout these phases. Fundamentally, in the end, life is a bit unpredictable. There could be some unplanned events, circumstance, whether it's health or other. And, somewhat advanced care planning is an ability to plan for the unplanned, but making sure that not only your wishes are understood by your own self, but are communicated in the community around you, so that you're surrounded by a group of advocates within your environment. This process, in the end, also gives you peace of mind, knowing that your affairs are organized, your wishes are understood, and that you do have a community around you. So in the end, advanced care planning is about reflecting on what makes life worth living, what is truly important to you, what do you value, what you wish to live in every day, and you need to think of that in the everyday of potential future life transitions and ultimately end of life care. So moving on to the next slide, and I believe Leslie is going to present the next few slides.
So I'd like to just build a little bit on what Marc was saying about advanced care planning. I'd like to talk a little bit about advanced care planning conversation and goals of care conversations and what distinguishes one from the other. So if you look on the screen, you'll see sort of an inverted triangle. And at the top, you have advanced care planning. Advanced care planning are beginning conversations. Advanced care planning is thinking forward. It's thinking about what is important to you should your days be limited due to disease or accident or the natural progression of dying. So it involves conversations while you're mentally capable, when you can share your values, your wishes, your beliefs, the things that are important to you with your friends and family, and most importantly, your substitute decision maker or potentially substitute decision makers. You may have more than one. And it can happen at any point, obviously, in life. Certainly the earlier the better, because as Marc has said, life is really unpredictable. And, when I have 93-year-old parents, and as people's cognitive ability fades, it can be very difficult to have these conversations. So, you could be having these conversations when you're 20, and it may be that this conversation is ongoing for decades and things may change. But waiting too long can sometimes limit the ability of a substitute decision maker to make decisions that would really reflect what you want. So I just want to move on now to goals of care conversations. They're typically at a later point. So these normally happen in the context of an illness or an accident, or perhaps comfort measures as someone is dying. So these are discussions or conversations that are about options for treatment, like what are the possible treatment and care options. And these are conversations that happen with a healthcare provider and yourself if you're mentally capable. But if you are not mentally capable, then these are the conversations that the healthcare provider would be having with your substitute decision maker. You know, the advanced care planning conversation inform the goals of care conversations, so that treatment and care options are based on a person's wishes and values. The very last part of that inverted triangle, consent for treatment of care, that's a conversation with a healthcare provider when a decision is required for personal care or treatment. So that's in that deciding moment when there may be a number of treatment options where a person who's mentally capable can give consent, or if they are not mentally capable, then that is when a healthcare provider will turn to a substitute decision maker for consent. In Ontario, the law requires that all healthcare providers get informed consent or possibly refusal of consent before they provide a patient with any treatment of care. So a healthcare provider must tell you about your illness or perhaps condition related to accident, and what might be able to be done to treat you, as well as any of the risks, the benefits, the side effects, and alternative treatments or care. And again, advantages and disadvantages of those. The other thing they have to tell you is what would happen if you refuse care, if you refuse the options that are presented. And then you have the right to make a decision and agree to a particular treatment or refusal of treatment. So it's a basic right to decide what healthcare you receive. And that is the standard. There's kind of no going around that, except in emergencies. So there are probably two, actually. So one is emergencies, and you see this in emergency departments, where in order to reduce suffering, save somebody's life, people can be treated without informed consent because there is no time to find a substitute decision maker, or there may not be a substitute decision maker that's readily available. So the other time that consent is not required is with do not resuscitate orders. So that would be the other time where a written consent can be observed. However, apart from that, it's always consent by a person. So I guess just to summarize this piece, you know, the values, wishes, beliefs, what's important to you, goals of care. These are overarching ideas that help focus how you think about your health, about living, and they guide decisions that you may make for yourself or someone else may make on your behalf. Advanced care planning, when done when you're mentally capable, can support and guide your substitute decision maker to have goals of conversation or goals of care conversations with healthcare providers that align with what you would have said yourself. So I think what we're trying to do, and I'll just move to the next slide here, is highlight the two really important parts of advanced care planning. And the first is and we'll talk more about this later, but identifying your substitute decision maker. That's the person or the people who will make your healthcare decisions for you in the event you're mentally incapable of making them for yourself. So that's kind of the very first big piece. And then the second piece is having conversations with them about what's important to you, the kinds of care that you might want to receive, how you see yourself living at the end of your life. And of course, you want to have these conversations not with only with your substitute decision maker or makers, but with other people that are important to you. It might be friends and families. So these things should be done, obviously, long before there's a crisis, when you have time to think about it and have this discussion with your substitute decision maker. So I want to move on to a story here that focuses a bit on this kind of a conversation and why it's important for your substitute decision maker to know what's important to you. And I don't know if anyone on this Zoom call has read Being Mortal. It's a book by Dr. Atul Gawande, and I certainly recommend it as an interesting read. And in fact, it was a book that I recommended to my dad to read because, again, I was having a lot of difficulty opening up this conversation. My dad's response to me is always, "Oh, you'll know what to do," which doesn't give me a lot to go on. So I thought, reading this book gave us another way of trying to get into this conversation. So Dr. Gawande had a friend, Susan, whose dad was facing a decision. He was having surgery to remove a tumor in his spinal cord, and it had a 20% chance that it would leave him a quadriplegic. So the night before the surgery, Susan, who was his daughter and was his substitute decision maker, if he could no longer make decisions for himself, was sitting by his bedside in the hospital. And she asked him what he was worried about. She asked him if anything terrible should happen, how much suffering was he willing to go through for the sake of simply added time. She asked him if something were to go awry, and in fact, he did become a quadriplegic, would that be okay? What was he worried about? And he said to her, I can endure a lot of pain. That doesn't trouble me. I'm willing to undergo almost anything as long as I can still watch football on television and eat chocolate ice cream. Now, I think most of us would be probably blown away. Somebody going into potentially life-changing surgery would highlight or prioritize these two things as being the most important to them: watching football and eating chocolate ice cream. So, you can imagine that she was flabbergasted, but accepted that as something that was truly, truly important to him. The next day, the operation happened, and her father came out initially doing well. However, he began to bleed, and it left him with encroaching quadriplegia. The surgeon then came to Susan. Since her father at this point was incapable of making a decision, the surgeon came to Susan to make the decision. The question was, should they take him back to the operating room or not? When the reality was he was going to come out a quadriplegic, no matter what they did at this point. And she realized that she had the answer. So she asked the surgeon, she said, will he be able to eat ice cream and watch football on television after the surgery? And the surgeon's response was yes. So she signed to have him go to surgery. Now, if Susan hadn't had that conversation, as simple as it was with her father, almost any answer she would have given would have racked her for the rest of her life. So, if she'd said no and he died, she wouldn't have been sure if that was the right answer. If she said yes and knew how much pain and trauma he had to go through rehabilitation, she would have perhaps thought she made a terrible mistake. So really, no matter what decision she made, had she not had the conversation with her dad, she would have second guessed herself. As it turned out, her dad did recover enough after a lot of rehab to go on to write some articles, write a book. About 8 years later, he reached a point where he was deteriorating rapidly, was very weakened, and he could no longer eat. And a decision had to be made whether he would want to have a feeding tube as the only way that he would be able to survive. He was mentally capable at this point, and he decided no. So they brought him home with hospice care, and shortly thereafter, he died without food or water, as he'd chosen, with his family around him. So it highlights the importance of understanding people's wishes. And while they may seem unusual to us, they can really help guide us in making some decisions. We never know what the decisions specifically are going to be, because we don't know exactly what the health condition will be, what the treatment options will be. But having these conversations does give us something to go on to best reflect what perhaps the decision someone would have made for themselves. So let me ask you to think about this. What are your football and ice cream must-haves? What is really, really important to you? With that, I'll turn it over to Marc.
Thank you, Leslie. And it's always a touching story every time I read this. And I think getting to those few criteria that are a priority for one individual is easier said than done, but I think it does start with a conversation. And this is a good segue to introduce you to our little exercise today. It's called the Go Wish game. It's designed to help you find words to talk about what's important to you if you were in a situation with an illness or facing potential death or end of life or transition in life, regardless. So at this point in time, before we go into the breakout room, I just want to make sure that you all have a handout. I saw in chat that it was posted in chat, and I believe it was sent by email before. On this handout, you will see 36 statements, and these are statements that help describe how people want to be treated, who they want near them, and what matters to them in the context of being very sick or dying. Okay, so, and that will encourage you to reflect on that particular situation. If you haven't done so already, if you have, then it's just going to continue that process for yourself. So we're going to break up in smaller group. I believe the groups are 4 to 6 people. It's automatically going to happen through the technology. Jen has all organized that for us. And in these small group, some of them will have a facilitator, either myself or Leslie. In some of the group, you're going to have to be self-managed. So I hope either one or multiple people could take the lead, or you could get self-organized for those groups where we're not there. I'm not really concerned with that. And really, it's to look at the handout and to select 2 statements, for each of you to select 2 statements that are meaningful to you. And there's no right or wrong answer. Every one of you will possibly select something, and then reflect on why those statements are important to you and share it with the group. And it'll either surface some of your wishes or fundamental beliefs or values, or you may want to even talk about certain experience that you may have. Let's try to have everyone in the group talk. However, it could be uncomfortable for some of you. And as we said at the outset of this session, if you are uncomfortable, or even through the process as you start talking or hearing some conversation, you have some challenging emotions, it's okay, it's normal. Feel free to leave the discussion on your own will by pushing the leave button, and then it'll give you the choice of leaving the breakout or the session. We hope you do come back to the session as we continue going through the material, but that's your choice, and we do provide that flexibility. So without further ado, we'll move on to the next step of the exercise and to the breakout rooms.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to reiterate what Mark said here. I'm opening up the room, so it'll be automatically placed into the breakout rooms. You'll have 20 minutes, but as Mark mentioned, if you'd like to leave and return to the main group and wait, you could do so by clicking that red button at the bottom corner that says leave breakout rooms. Okay, I hope everyone enjoys their conversations.
Do we have everyone here?
We do have everyone back now.
Okay, well, thank you. Wow, I always enjoy these sessions, and I love people and love the interaction, but what you learn and what you hear, it's always inspiring. It could get emotional, and it did get in our room. We had a whole bunch of perspective in our room, and at this point in time, I would like maybe people to come and share some of what they heard or in the room, or share the experience here, and it could be anything. And I will encourage you this by, I think there's a raise button, raise our hand somewhere. So if you could raise your hand, and Jenna will coordinate who could speak at this moment in time.
Yes, so as Mark mentioned, you can use a raise hand function, and then I can see that you raised your hand and I'll call upon you. And if you're having any trouble with that, you could even try waving in your video right now and I can try to call upon you. Oh, I do see that Rod has his hand raised, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you may go ahead.
Rod?
Right, so you'll have to unmute yourself, and then you're, oh. Okay, oh. Okay, well, perhaps we'll wait on Rod. We'll go on to Andrew. Andrew, you may go ahead.
It's Eileen that's going to speak, and I just wanted to say that the session was so well moderated.
Eileen, could you get closer to Andrew?
Yes, I can. I just wanted to say that our session was so well moderated, and the contributions so thoughtful, that ours could have been gone on another 20, 30 minutes or longer. Thank you.
And I'm going to add, there was a great variety in the session that I participated with Eileen in. There was anywhere from people that were planning for themselves, but proactively looking at their parents, and because of family of 10 and hoping there wouldn't be family rifts through the process. And there were some cases where people were actually in the phases of end of life or critical illness. So we had a really, really wide spectrum of perspective, and it was very touching.
I see that now Carol also has her hand raised. You may go ahead.
Hi, Carol. I just wanted to agree solely everything with Eileen said. Our group was fabulous. I was part there with Mark, and I learned that it's a very, sorry, I have a dog growling here in the back. It's a very hard challenge, and that it's something that I have to really continue educating myself on, because there is no one answer fits all here. And it's just, I want to thank for putting on this seminar, and that I am learning a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And I do see also Chris has his hand raised. You may go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks, Mark, for your expert facilitation of our little group. I wanted to add that because of my condition, I've shared that with the small group, it's ALS. I was recently invited to participate in a research effort or initiative conducted by the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute and the ALS Clinic. And when I was first approached to participate in this research initiative, it's called End of Life and Palliative Care, something or other. I thought, holy hell, already they're asking me to participate in something like this. But I found out through a couple of sessions so far that the focus was really on the kinds of things we're talking about in this session, such as quality of life and the importance of enjoyment and satisfaction in daily activities and so forth. So it kind of opened my eyes to the concept that palliative care is not just something that happens in the last month. It can start much earlier and be continuing to be supportive, not just at the very end, but well prior to that. Thanks.
Chris, thank you so much for that additional perspective and sharing that with the whole group. I know many people in Compassionate Ottawa would have been happy, probably we paid you to say what you just said, because there's a whole misconcept that palliative care is only for people in, as you said, in the last few months, and it is not. It's about quality of life, and for some people it's many, many years ahead. So a very important intervention and sharing of your experience in that. Thank you very so much.
How much do you pay?
I'll leave that to Jenna and the rest of the team. Anyone else wants to jump in? If not, we'll possibly proceed to the next part of the session.
I see a gentleman here, Kishore, I believe.
Yep. Yeah, I just only have to make one comment, is that nice to know that I'm not the only one who've been thinking about and worrying about all the topics that you put on the wish list. Hopefully something will come out of it. That's all.
Thank you, Kishore.
Thank you.
Oh.
Rod has raised his hand again, so you was the first. So can we give him a last chance?
Of course. Oh, and Rod, you may go ahead. I'm not sure if we've lost him. And if you're unable to unmute, you can always just add your comments and questions, of course, in the chat as well if you're having trouble. Oh, and I think we're just experiencing some difficulties there with Rod, so apologies. I'll turn it back to Mark.
So I think we're going to turn it out to Leslie. I think we're moving on to the next slide. So Leslie is now going to, we already started how to start a conversation, and she's going to expand on the whole area. So here you go. Leslie, I think you have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Sorry about that. I didn't know I had to unmute myself. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So we actually talked about this in the small group, sort of getting the conversation started, and certainly recognize that it can be difficult. So, you know, how you begin these conversations depends on what's comfortable to you, but often it depends on what's comfortable for the person that you're talking to. You know, there are some considerations about kind of when and how and to start these conversations. So I'm going to give you a few examples, and I'll talk about a few examples that came up in our group as well. But there are lots of ways 4 or 5 examples of things you might use if you're finding it a bit tricky. Of course, you could be straightforward, something as simple as, you know, my health's good right now, but I want to talk to you about what I'd want if I was sick and needed you to make decisions for me. So something, you know, just right up front like that. You might connect it to someone else. I was visiting my doctor, or I was visiting my lawyer, and they asked me about advanced care planning and whether I'd shared my wishes with anyone. And, you know, I'd like to do that with you. Someone in our group was updating their will, and that's sometimes a really good time to introduce the conversation, because it's not just about property, but you might have some considerations around your personal health care and who's going to make decisions for you, and you might bring this up with someone that you want to chat with. You might use this workshop. You know, I was at a seminar today where we were talking about advanced care planning. You know, what would be important to me? What would bring me quality in life if I had limited time to live? And I'd like to talk to you about that. Another person in our group talked about how the Go Wish list would be a really good resource for talking about it. You could actually use a copy of that list and go through it and say, you know, if I was looking at these are the things that would be most important for me. So, you know, I think it's recognizing it can be a little difficult to start, but it's important. And as someone in our group mentioned, it brought a lot of relief to the person that she was able to talk about what she would want. And so while it may be difficult to get started, it's well worth it in the end. I'm going to move on to the next slide, Jenna. Imagine you're at the hospital, too ill or hurt to make decisions for yourself, to speak for yourself. Do you know who would make healthcare decisions for you? And the answer to this question is the person or persons would be your substitute decision maker. So if you're in a situation, as imagined in the slide, then it means that you would be considered mentally incapable of making a decision. And we talked a little bit previously about how Ontario law requires you be capable to make a decision. And in Ontario, capacity is a person having the ability to understand the information. So being able to really be cognizant and understand the treatment options that are being provided, what those risks and benefits are, and also to be able to appreciate a lack of decision or turning down a treatment option. So that's how capacity is defined. And typically, it's the healthcare provider that is making an assessment about capacity. Sometimes it's easy because somebody's not conscious. Or something happens and the person is under an anesthetic. But sometimes capacity is a little less obvious. I'll give you an example. My mom, again, she's 93, and I go to all her appointments with her, and she's got some cognitive impairment, and she's, you know, living with dementia, and she just wants to answer what she thinks people want to hear. So they'll say, are you on medication? She'll say, no. They'll say, have you had any significant health conditions? She'll say, no. Have you ever had a stroke? No. And I have to intervene and say, wait a minute, Mom, remember you're on these, and I can show the physician because I have a picture on my phone. So they're assuming that she's capable until I trigger an awareness that she's not actually responding to the questions with capacity. So, you know, there are some gray areas here, and I don't want to make it sound like it's, but capacity is this being able to really understand what it's all about and being able to assess them and then provide the answer that you're comfortable with. If you're not mentally capable, then the healthcare provider turns to another person and it's going to be your substitute decision maker. And this person, your substitute decision maker, will speak for you and make decisions about your care. So advanced care planning lets you know who'd speak for you. And also advanced care planning guides this substitute decision maker probably most in line with what you would have made for yourself. So just to talk a little bit about this substitute decision maker, these people are important. I mean, the substitute decision maker is consenting to tests, to surgery, to procedures. They can refuse treatment. They can withdraw life-prolonging measures. They can consent to entry or discharge from facilities. They have the ability to decide on personal care, services, long-term care options. So these people are significant in terms of the decisions that would be made if you couldn't make them yourself related to healthcare. So you really want to think about who would honor your wishes, even if they didn't necessarily agree with them, like who would be a good advocate for you and really be grounded in your wishes based on your best interest. Who's comfortable in healthcare settings? You know, who can be calm? Sometimes these are decisions that need to be made fairly quickly under a fair bit of stress. So these are things to kind of consider as you're looking at who your substitute decision maker is. So I could ask the question, who here has a substitute decision maker? And the fact is that all of us do. Whether you've picked someone or not, you have a substitute decision maker. The Healthcare Consent Act outlines a hierarchy of your possible substitute decision makers. And we're going to send you a book at the end of this session today. It's called Speak Up. And you'll be able to look in that book and actually see the hierarchy of who your substitute decision maker would be. And I'll just give you a quick example. So I have a partner, and so he would be my automatic substitute decision maker. If he were to die, then it would fall to possibly my dad, but certainly my two children. So there's sort of a hierarchy of who your automatic substitute decision maker will be. And, you know, as long as these people are, you know, mentally capable, they're 16 or over, they're willing to do it, this hierarchy will identify someone. If there are, and sometimes in this hierarchy, there is more than one person. So let's say you have 3 children and they're the highest in the hierarchy for you as automatic substitute decision makers, then all 3 of your children have equal say on your behalf. They can designate one of them, but in fact, if they don't do that, they all have equal say. It can be tricky because if there's disagreement amongst equally ranked decision makers and it can't be resolved, then the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee may be asked to make a decision. And so, you know, you want to have a conversation with all of your substitute decision makers because it is important that that they agree. And I'll just give you a quick example here. A friend of mine has 3 children. She is a widow. And so her automatic substitute decision makers would have been her 3 children. And she felt that that was not in her best interest. She felt that 2 of her children, one was too emotional and would not be able to make a decision. One she felt did not align with the kinds of care and treatment that she would want. So she actually designated through a power of attorney for personal care that Marc's going to talk about in a moment. She designated one of those 3 children to actually be the person to make decisions on her behalf. So, you know, it is something to think about. I mean, take a look at that hierarchy. It may be the person that's identified is in fact the person that you want to make decisions on your behalf, but it may not be. And if it's not, then you can look at designating someone through a power of attorney for personal care. And I'll turn it over to Marc to talk about that.
Thank you. This is actually a very important subject because, as Leslie mentioned, it takes a special kind of person. And maybe before we get into the process here, I just want to let you know a little bit of my personal experience. When came time, my parents had already more or less decided who would be managing their affairs through their will. When we came through the process and for the power of attorney, I realized the power of attorney were not put in place as clearly as possible, and it was not clear. But in the end, the open conversation with my parents made sure that we shared the load. And I want to mention that because there's a power of attorney for care, and that's what we're really talking about today, is who the power of attorney for care fundamentally designate who the substitute decision maker will be should you not choose the de facto hierarchy. It is different than the power of attorney for property, which is the person that would be responsible for taking care of financial affairs and asset management, investment, or whatever. But they're two separate. And as part of the decision, and we don't often talk about it, is two things. First of all, it is work. It could become a lot of work. And I could tell you in the case of our family right now, my sister, I'm going to call her an angel from God because it's almost full time for her. She's dedicated, she's the right person, and so on. And we split the role and we involve the family. So I want to go through this because, you know, as you reflect on this, maybe the hierarchy is correct, but at one point or another, you may say, you know what, I would like to be very clear who it is. And you also have to think through of the criteria for selection. And as Leslie mentioned, you know, it takes a special kind of person to take care, and it's not for everybody, and there's nothing right or wrong if one person's not the right match. And so through that process, you're going to want to perhaps say, you know what, I don't want just to rely on the hierarchy that the government promotes, and I would like to be very clear and be able, very specific, and appoint someone. And by the way, you could appoint multiple people. In some cases it's desirable, some cases less. You could ask for consensus versus everyone operate independently. So all of those are possible options that, you know, you could think through. But at the basics, you either go through what is de facto in the substitute decision maker, and otherwise you're going to specify the power of attorney. And you know, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. Now, in terms of a power of attorney, there's different ways to go about that. You could go on the website of the Office of Public Guardian and Trustee, and there's a power of attorney form, and I believe there's a process there, and you complete the form. In the end, whether you go through that process or other online computerized process that are now available all over, or go through a formal legal process with your lawyer, in the end, you end up with a document that assigns the person and will have been witnessed by at least two people. So there's a whole process in there. I won't go, I'd rather leave time for the Q&A, so I won't go in more detail. Some of you may have some questions, but fundamentally, at this point in time, if you're not going to go and then use a de facto, you need to appoint it. The last comment that I'm going to mention is a bit dear to my heart, is again something we lived through with my parents. And a lot of people will say, well, my spouse is going to be the person, and that's works quite well if you're in the early age of your retirement or your aging years that I call. But as you get older, both parties may have degradation, and often enough it may be a younger person that's better to do that. So make sure that that's part of the reflection, and you may want to evolve it through the aging years. So at this point in time, I'll hand over the next slide to Leslie. Oh no, this is mine. Sorry. We've talked here, assuming sometime ideal situation where you have family, you have close friends, close relatives, and so on. there are a lot of people that have a challenge identifying the right person, and they're living alone or single, may not have many relatives or relatives that they trust, and so on. So what do they do? And you know, there's no easy answer here, but you know, there's an encouragement to reach out to your community, whether it's nonprofit you're involved, whether it's work community, whether it's your neighborhood, family and friends, and so on, and reach out and try to open up dialogue and partner with this community to identify who may be your substitute decision maker. You may even reach out to your healthcare provider, your doctor, and so on, and see if they have some ideas. And in the end, there may be some legal entity or some government entity that that could take care of you. But there is a process. Leaving it to nobody, I would suggest, is not necessarily a good idea, because as I said, you deserve, everyone deserves a quality of life and their wishes to be respected, and find a mechanism to do so. And for some, it's easier and it's a longer process to get there. But again, use the various mechanism that could be available through your community and your engagement with the community. Ultimately, it will default to the office of the public guardian and trustee. So I'll leave it to that. And if you have specific situations, certainly reach out to Compassion Ottawa, and we'll see what we may be able to do to help you, or there will be a lot of information provided at the end of the session via email to yourself.
Yeah, just a really quick example. I know we're running out of time, but this just happened really recently. A friend of mine actually did a power of attorney with someone in her book club. And the way this happened is they were reading a book. I don't even know what the title was, about death and dying. And anyway, they were having a discussion about it. And this person kind of aligned with her own thoughts and feelings. And she didn't have any children. She didn't have a partner. She has some relatives, but I think they're in Scotland or somewhere. So in the end, after this discussion, she connected with this person and identified her, and she accepted as power of attorney for personal care. So we're really short on time. I want to very quickly go through the 5 steps. You'll get this slide, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but it is a process. So advanced care planning is a bit of a process. You need to think about it. What is important to you? What brings you quality of life? You need to learn about particularly your own health, or perhaps things that run in your family. What might you expect? What are some of those treatment options? How might it be managed? What kind of side effects would you be willing to live with? So that you just have a sense of your own health and how it may play out. Of course, many things are completely unpredictable. Decide on your substitute decision maker or makers. Really important to let them know that you would like them to be your substitute decision maker, because they need to agree to do it. Then you need to communicate with them, talk with them, make sure they really understand what's important to you, so that they feel they have the information to make decisions for you. And finally, if you can record in some format some of what's important to you, that can be very helpful to your substitute decision maker, and also alleviate some of the concerns that friends and family may have. And this can be written down, it can be a video, it can be recorded. The only thing is to remember that these are ongoing conversations, and you know, as things change, you might want to make sure that you've given an updated version. In our group, it came up, well, what do you do with this? And really, it needs to go to your substitute decision maker or makers. And also they might, you know, you might want to have one in your home somewhere, and make sure that that person knows where it is, as well as your friends and family. So very quickly, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for coming. But we hope that you'll begin having these conversations with people so that the substitute decision maker is in the very best position to do, in fact, what you would have done had you been capable of making your own decisions. I'm going to turn it over to Jenna now to quickly run through some of the resources that you're going to get.
Thank you, Leslie, and I'll do a quick 20-second overview. So after today's workshop, we are going to send you all these wonderful resources to help you with your own journey with ACP, help you get started with learning more about what ACP is all about. And we're also going to send you a feedback survey. So just very quickly, Leslie and Mark had mentioned, there's a Speak Up book that has everything that you need to know about advanced care planning. I'd really highly recommend that everyone reads that. All you need to do is click on the little links down here and it'll take you directly to them. The 5 steps are here. There's some resources locally as well if you need palliative care support in Ottawa and around the area. And you can create your own POA for personal care. There's a form here that helps you do it. Again, some fantastic workbooks and handouts. We really recommend. Answers a lot of frequently asked questions. And of course, we have some good videos as well that may also help you break the ice in some of these conversations. And of course, here's how you could reach us if you would like to know more about Compassionate Ottawa. And I do realize we're out of time, so I will turn it back to Linda to close out the workshop.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation today. We especially thank our presenters, Mark and Leslie and Jenna, and everyone for your candor and compassion and the sharing that you've done here today. Remember, you're going to get an email from us, from the Ottawa branch, that will include information on how to access the recording, how to access the presentation resources that you just saw previewed, and also how to give the gift of membership in our association or join the association, and other contact information to follow up. So I just want to remind you again, please remember that you can invite non-members to experience these webinars with us. So if you see it as valuable, we're hoping that they will too. And our next one coming up is on March the 2nd. It's called Life Insurance and Estate Planning, How to Minimize Probate and Taxes by our RBC Dominion Securities. And if you're interested in registering for any more of our webinars, you can do that on our website, and we'll include the website address in the follow-up email. So thank you all again for this morning, and we very much appreciate your participation. We hope to see you at our next webinar. Merci beaucoup et au revoir.